Hi to the panel. I'm a First Nations woman from the Jarrawa mob in southeast Queensland, and I have worked in Aboriginal welfare settings for over 25 years, and I have survived being torn apart by government legislation. Given the situation at Hawthorn Football Club and the Voice to Parliament being debated in boardrooms and bars, there appears to be some hostility towards First Nations people. My question to the panel is, why is there so much hostility and how do we remove it?
Alan, I'll go to you on this because we're talking again about racism and racism allegations in the AFL. We know what Adam Goodes went through. And at the time, you said that Adam Goodes was playing the victim and he needs to change his behaviour if he wants crowds to stop booing him. Have you had time to reflect on that and regret those comments?
Those comments were made in relation to a young girl who had severe mental and personal disability. She was 13 years of age, and she made a comment as he was leaving the field.
Wasn't just a comment. You know what the you know the offensive nature of it. But I just want to be clear on this because Adam also defended the girl the next day and said we need to be considerate of the girl. But you said he was playing the victim. Why?
Well, he did play the victim at that point. The girl was still locked up in the changing room, I think it was at the MCG, until 1 o'clock in the morning. And this was a girl who had severe personal and mental disabilities. Adam should have acknowledged that and left it alone. He made it a major issue. The girl already had problems. She was then further humiliated by being locked up till 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said at the time I thought there was a better way of dealing with the problem that he encountered. That's what I said.
And when you reflect on this today and you look at obviously the hurt Adam went through, because the booing did not just last a week, it lasted year on year on year. He walked away from the game. He said about the emotional distress it was causing and causing his family. Do you look at that now and look at that as a shameful episode in Australian sporting history?
Which
the booing of Adam for year on year on year.
Well, I don't know who was responsible for the bullying of Adam Goodes. My comments were related to the little girl, and I'd stand by what I said in relation to the little girl. But coming back to your point about the Hawthorn Club, I've never heard of stuff like this. If this has happened, it's unbelievable. My concern here is that the report hasn't been released. It's been leaked to the ABC and I think the Melbourne Age. And those people who apparently are most alleged to have done this stuff were never interviewed. They've never been consulted. Their viewpoint has never been heard. So I think we do need a very significant inquiry. But I've coached Aboriginal people. I've put my hand in my pocket for Aboriginal people. I've never known anything like this. What we're reading is horrific and unacceptable.
Ben, you've played sport, you've played cricket. When you hear these allegations and reflect on the history of racism in sport, what does this say to you?
Well, first, I see you and thank you for coming and sharing a bit about your story, and then having Mr. Jones next to me be the first person to respond to that. There's a saying that when there's smoke, there's fire. And then when there's an inferno, there's the AFL. Now, there is a long line of deep pain that blackfellas have been subjugated to playing sport, and environments that we look up to and say, hey, I can get there and I can be free. And then what's damning about that is when you make it into those environments, you're still under the same control, and you have to be the perfect little native for people to accept you. Now, what's happened at Hawthorn, the revelations that have come out of that are very consistent with the surveillance, the censorship that you're talking about in your question, right? And what I was attempting to articulate to Mr. Jones before. Everything that is done to us by people that say that they are helping us, right, is done so through the lens that they are lifting us up, as if they know better for us. We cannot govern ourselves. We cannot make independent, informed decisions for our families. Now, I think it's time for, honestly, with how much has gone on, I think it's time for Indigenous players across the AFL to boycott. I think it's time to learn from the Wave Hill walk-off. I think it's time to learn from a lot of the other political movements throughout history that solidarity always wins. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the AFL are the #1 shareholders. They bring so much joy to the game, so much joy to people's lives, but if you can't be free in those moments, and all of us in those moments, then none of us are. And I think it's time to boycott. I think it's time to put a moratorium on Indigenous round. I think it's time to take off the Guernseys. I think it's time to demand real change, and not through the players' associations who continually let the players down as well. I think it's got to be done independently, and that's the only way that we're going to see some significant
On the
change.
question of independence, Ed, is it time for the federal government to take this out of the hands of the AFL and call an independent inquiry in this? Racism is meant to be illegal, and yet we see these are allegations now, they'll be investigated. But is there a need for a further investigation?
Well, the issue is how long and how often the AFL has these allegations put to them. And if they worked as furiously on this issue as they do to get new TV rights, maybe we'd get somewhere. Really? Like when it means something to them, they work real hard. And I think on this, they're not working as hard. And if it does take an independent investigation, I mean, you've put that on the table, and obviously we'll take that on board. But there is a strong level of feeling about this, and I put together the way you phrased your question and the experience and your concern about how your voice is heard, treated, the response to it. You know, Adam Goods, Alan, like it wasn't just, I hear what you're saying, but it wasn't just one incident. Like, you know, for a person to react like that, there's been a build-up. This has happened a number of times and gets to that point, and then you get Hawthorn. So, you know, there is something serious there that has to be dealt with. And the other thing is too, we have to be honest enough as a country to recognise it and not to always shy away and say, oh, we can't talk about that, it's not really
No, but
racist.
as Stan is right, I think it needs an independent judicial inquiry external to the AFL, a judicial inquiry. The government should regard it as serious enough, whoever's ever in charge, Linda or somebody, and say, we are instituting this inquiry. But I just come back to your point, which is a very serious point, and Ben won't agree with this, but I just want to know, because you say self-management is everything, we pretend that we know how best to handle your problems,
This
if we
is
don't
true.
want that.
That you created
hang
as
on,
well.
What do you do then? OK, what do you do about the violence, the appalling violence towards women in the Northern Territory, which has done, no action has been taken about it. Jacinta Price came to Canberra last year with horrific revelations about what was going on in the Northern Territory. No one has opened their mouth to support her, and nothing has been done.
Come on, Alan,
So violence
against women cuts across all colours.
It does, but I'm just saying, we're talking about the violence
But
in the
every
Northern
time it
Territory.
comes up in this discussion...
And if you're managing these things, Ben, what are you doing to address those issues?
Can I just say too, we're having this conversation in front of an Aboriginal woman who is brought this question to us, and Deirdre, I could hear the distress in your voice even bringing the question.
Yeah,
and I wanted to say, can we just leave that where it sits right now? Deirdre, thank you so much for raising that question.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry that you have to even ask the question, because clearly these are not easy questions to ask. You've had the courage to ask that.
Yes.
So thank you so much.